Hello once again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher, also known as tubalcain, and in this rather long video I will be assembling and running this beautiful little Stirlingkit steam engine along with the boiler. Now do not confuse these engines with the cheaper boys' toys that they made years ago, such as Jensen and so on, and there's nothing wrong with them, but they were priced for a Christmas present. These are pretty costly. I'm not going to lie to you on that. But the older models for boys were basically stamping, sheet metal stampings, so that they could sell them cheap. This is precision brass castings, a copper boiler, extremely high quality, which I'll explain to you as I go along. Again, it's not really for children, ages 16 and up, mainly for hobbyists and collectors. Now, this was provided to me for free from Stirlingkit as a promotional video, and but I think you're going to really enjoy this, and please watch to the entire end. Now, there are some scenes where I probably will speed up or skip sections because it's going to be a little tedious as I work with those tiny little screws. If you're over 50, you're going to need optivisors and tweezers and so on. I will not do a complete unpacking as some people do because that is boring, but I'm going to show you what's inside of the box and show you the quality of the castings. Now, if you're interested in such a kit, I will have links in the description along with the discount code. This would make a great Christmas present for a hobbyist. And here's a beautiful color picture of the completed engine along with the boiler, and this is a functional operating model. I didn't mention it yet, but this is model number RW-1K. These engines are always extremely well packed, so there's a nice set of directions, but of course there's some Chinesium in there. I do not know why they do not have an American proofread them so that we have the spelling correct and on and on. There's the base, and here are the castings themselves, the screws. The boiler is in here, but the thing I want to show you, and I'll unpack this off camera, but examining these castings, now this is brass or bronze, and they're so beautifully made, and they're already machined, so there is no machining involved, it's all assembly. But I thought maybe that these precision castings were investment cast, but in reading the directions, they are die cast, and I wasn't even aware that you could die cast brass, but the quality is actually supreme. And let's take a look at the cylinder here, if I can get it out. Already machined, but the interesting thing here is that there's a stainless steel liner, cylinder liner. Okay, I'll get everything out and be back in a minute. Okay, all of the pieces have been removed from the packing, but notice that everything is in bags and very well packed and protected. There are more parts inside of here, which I will show you presently, but here is the sum total of the parts. Notice that there's a little tool kit here as well, so you don't need to buy tools. So let me get everything out of the little wrappers, and I'll be right back. Make sure you have some little containers to put the screws and other parts so you don't lose anything, because if you lose a screw, you're not going to be able to go to the dollar store and get one. These will be metric and pretty well specialized. I may or may not show you pictures of assembly as I go along, but there might be some still pictures at the end of the video, but there's very detailed instructions on how to assemble it, and at the very end how to operate it, and a lot of safety warnings in here as well, because remember, you can be scalded by steam, so be very careful when you fire this thing up. Okay, all of the parts that are in these little cups were individually bagged and they were numbered. For instance, these screws here are number 6. So I emptied them out, but I saved this so I can refer to that if I need to. A lot of tiny parts, and the screws are just miniature. And here's spare parts O-rings and things. I will not open that at this time. This is the tools that came with it. Now, yeah, they're kind of poor quality because they're throwaways. I may use some other tools during assembly. This is the burner, and it will use denatured alcohol. Here's the housing for the boiler. That's steel, painted. And here's the boiler itself. Actual drawn copper. This would be the sight glass end, and it's silver soldered, so that's really nice. And I showed you that. This is the little lubricator to put oil in it. Steam oil, I don't have any. But, all right, I'm not going to show you everything else because you'll see that during the assembly. This is the base. Again, it's brass and machined and tapped. You don't need any threading tools or anything like that. And here's the flywheel. It's kind of heavy. I'm not sure what the material is. It's semi-magnetic, but it's not pure iron, I don't believe, but it's got some weight to it. And we got some cute little tags here. And this is going to be fun. Do not expect to do this in one evening where you might get frustrated. Key parts are pre-assembled for you, and that's nice. So the connecting rod is already on the crankshaft, as is the beautiful little reversing gear. Now this is the Stevenson type of reversing gear, world renowned. The steam box or valve box is semi pre-assembled, and it's even got a little pressure gauge. That's really important. And here's the safety valve, pop-off valve. All right, that's probably enough talking about this. Let's get to work. I forgot to mention, this is the base plate, and it's aluminum, about 1/8 inch thick, all pre-drilled, and it's anodized, a beautiful red color. There has been a great attention to detail, whoever designed this. Now, I'm sure all of these parts have been machined on CNC machines in China because, well, you're going to like this kit. Okay, here's step one as shown in the directions, and I have everything laid out here for that first assembly, along with a tiny little Bondus type of Allen wrench, surprisingly enough. But note here that the little pillow blocks are real ball bearings. So to start with, we got a couple little spacers, and they go onto the both ends of the crankshaft. And then the pillow blocks. And now that those parts are pre-assembled, I'm going to set it on the brass base like that, line up the screws, and pay attention to the orientation of the base. It's not centered. See, it's off to the center, and then I'll put all 4 of these little cap screws, and they are little. Step 1 is completed. If my hands were trembling with excitement, you may have noticed that. Of course, it may also be because I'm 82 years old. But get yourself a little oiler of some kind, and I will not do that until one of the very last steps so it's not messy. But make sure that everything turns over freely before you move on to the next step. Okay, I have all the parts laid out for the piston assembly, and notice I've got the 2 screws in there, and one is a flat head and one is a round head. They're tiny, and you're just going to have to dig through the screws to find the correct ones because they're all kind of mixed together, and you'll need a little patience for that. I'll oil it as I go along, probably a little oil on the O-ring, so that's going to be kind of a struggle getting the O-ring on there, which is actually the piston ring, if you will, and the piston rod, the flange, and well, this is another part of the connecting rod, and there's another little O-ring, right, so they're going to be assembled in that order, and I'll do that off camera because it's going to be fiddly. Now, there are certain fasteners that need to be locked on with a thread lock or Loctite, whatever you want to call it. This is medium strength from Harbor Freight. I wish I had the blue. Do not use any of the products that are called permanent thread lock. So I've got the O-ring on the piston, and these are the two screws, tiny little screws that need just a dab of this because you don't want the thing to fly apart at high speed. Here's an important tip for you. The overall length of the piston rod and so on should be 40.5 millimeters. I'm just a couple hairs over, which is just fine, but make sure you assemble it correctly. I'm going to show you a picture of a revision that they made to the blueprint, so check that out. Here is the revision that they made to the instructions. Yours may or may not include that revision. It's time to install the piston into the cylinder, and be sure and oil that because it's going to be a tight fit initially. And make sure that the steam ports here are on the right hand side as you assemble this. Also take note that the gasket's already in place right here, but both the top and the bottom gasket have a little notch in them that must be placed over the steam port there. So orient that correctly or you're going to block the steam passage. So in it goes with oil on it, and yeah, it is tight. And now I'll get this all positioned and be right back. Okay, place the cylinder head upside down. Now I've already lubricated the cross head here, and this will be assembled like this with 4 of these little screws. They're cap screws, tiny little things, but again, position your gasket correctly. And I'll be back in 5 minutes because this is going to be kind of tricky to line up the holes in both the casting here and the cylinder and the gasket. Here's a little tip for you and a correction, if you will. I used one of the little hex keys here to hold alignment while I was assembling the other screws. I still have 2 more to go, but take note that initially a minute ago I showed you that these screws were to be used, but they are not long enough, so find the 4 that are just a little bit longer, and they're more black in color than the bright silver plated. Well, I think I made a little mistake in the previous clip, so I'm going to leave the mistakes in the video because I think it'll help you. But I had the orientation of the cylinder 90 degrees off, and it needs to face like this as I go ahead and tighten these up. Another tip, if you have a cat or a kitten, lock them up in the other room because if they jump up on the table and knock this stuff over, you will... well, you might commit suicide. Also, if you have small children, keep them at bay so they don't say, "Daddy, what's this?" and ruin your evening because it is a little bit tedious. This is not for the faint of heart. And before we move on, let's make sure that, again, it's lubricated. And also here in the crosshead. And after that being done, take your little screwdriver and just make sure that the piston will move up and down. I need to use the larger one. And there's no binding because you don't want to go ahead any further steps if this doesn't move back and forth. The piston, that is. And it seems to be fine. It is a tight fit because that is an O-ring in there and probably needs to wear in a little bit during initial running. Okay, that step is done, and it wasn't easy. Next, we'll be doing the assembly of the reversing system. Refer to your directions constantly. So I've laid out the parts in pretty much the order that they will go. And again, I'll be using thread lock here. That is required or it'll fly apart. Notice the tiny parts here. Don't sneeze. Please note that we have threads here as well as a nut. So, with thread lock on the screw, make sure that you do not over tighten these. These have to swing freely like that. So bring the screw in, just barely touching, and then put the nut on and use this tiny cute little wrench to tighten it up, and then the Loctite should take care of it, and now I'll do the other one, the other part off camera. Okay, the sub-assembly is done. Make sure that the little levers move smoothly like this, not over tight, or it will cause you trouble later on. There's little washers in there. Be sure and look at the directions and follow the details in directions as well as what I tell you. This part isn't going to be easy, but we're going to assemble the connecting rod onto the piston into the crosshead here. And there's a tiny little, well, it's not the wrist pin, I'm not sure what they call it here, but these little E-clips or snap rings, they are tiny. Can you see them? They should have given you 10 of them, because they're going to pop. But I'm going to assemble one onto this pin. There are little grooves here. And then, I wish they had pre-assembled that. And then I'm going to put that on, line up the connecting rod with this piece, and put the little pin through it that already has one of these on it. And then I'll clip it on the other side. Now, I can't show that because that's going to take me 15 minutes. Now, here's what I'm going to do. And it might sound insane. I'm going to make that assembly inside of a baggie, because it has to be snapped on, maybe with a pliers or tweezers. But I know it's going to go twang and disappear, but I'll have it captured in the bag. Be back in a few minutes after a great deal of what I think will be frustration. I'm afraid I'm showing so much detail that for those of you that are not going to actually assemble one of these, it might be just too lengthy. So fast forward if you need to. But if you're actually going to do this, I think I'm giving you some pretty good tips. So I had my hands inside this 1-gallon baggie that I robbed off of my wife along with this pliers, and I snapped the one little snap ring on with success, and it didn't go flying, but boy, I dropped it a couple times. I can't tell you, it's so small that you need to pick these up by wetting the tip of your finger. Okay, now on to the hard part. I'm going to try to speed up just a little bit, but with the piston installed, and you can see the cross slide there, I'm going to assemble this onto the base. And in a minute, after I put a couple screws in, I'm going to insert the little pin that we just talked about with the E-clip. But as I fasten this down, the little mechanism here needs to be fastened here as well. So I'll do that off camera and be right back. Gosh, this thing is absolutely gorgeous. But I've put in the 4 screws, 2 here and 2 right here, and now I'm lining up the connecting rod, as you can see, with the screwdriver, and then I'll pull this out because of the alignment. Be sure and oil everything, and then I'll install the little pin along with that teeny tiny little, don't sneeze, E-clip, and then we'll attach this. Okay, I install the little clip without incident, as you can see, and I use that baggie method again. It didn't go flying, but it's just a good safety thing. And then right here, there's just a tiny little hex head, almost can't see it, hex head screw, brass. It's kind of a shoulder bolt. So I'm going to put that in. I already got it in, but I'm going to tighten it up with this teeny tiny little wrench. And if done correctly, this is your little reversing lever. So it should move freely. Stevenson valve gear assembly. I'm very hesitant to show you this, but if you have oiled everything and you've already turned it over by hand, I'm using the DeWalt drill here just to see that it turns. Don't run it full blast yet, but everything turns and is in alignment and looks real good. My heart is thumping. Okay, here's the valve box. this is the actual valve, and when we assemble on here, it needs to be in this position. You got two gaskets. The one with the extra ears goes right on the casting. And select the correct screws, and the cover needs to, it's got a little insignia on it. Make sure it's oriented as well. Put a little oil on this surface and then lay the valve down and the gasket like that, and then we're ready for this assembly. I call this the valve box. Note that the little slot here has to go into the reversing gear. I have two screws in temporarily. Also orient this opening here in this direction as per instructions. So off camera, because it'll be tricky, I'll put the gasket on, remove the screws, put the gasket on, and then the valve box cover. Do this any way you want, but you can see how I've got the screws in temporarily, and now this one's in permanently, but I'm able to swing the cover into place without losing my alignment. I'm holding the engine in a little machinist vise so it doesn't move around on me. I've got 3 screws in, and it went pretty well. Actually, it went flawlessly, and now I will torque down all 4 of them, and that part is done. Here's the head gasket, and again, orient it for the ports, and beautiful little brass head. RW. I'm going to put that, I believe, toward me. And then make sure you find the 4 correct little cap screws. They're 2 millimeter. Boy, are they tiny. And you might have to fiddle around a little bit to get the alignment. And then run the screws down all the way, and then we're going to torque them. Yes, torque them to 1 inch-pound. I always wondered what these tiny torque wrenches were for. I'm kidding, of course. And finally, there's a tiny little brass screw right here and a little roller, they call it. And those will be assembled right here through that hole and into the valve gear mechanism. And this is going to be tricky because this part is so tiny that you can hold it on the end of your wetted finger. So I will do that off camera, and then oil all of the linkage. That is, every screw should be oiled regularly as well as during assembly, and some oil on this little shaft. And that's all shown in the diagrams. Okay, that went quite well, and I've just got a hand vise on here now to spin it over, and you can see it moves freely. You do not want any binding. It will not run if it's binding. And make sure that the little reversing valve operates, and it does. And you might need to rotate the shaft a little bit to shift gears. This is the exhaust pipe and a flange and 2 screws, and that will be mounted right on this side of the cylinder. And that's what it looks like when it's mounted. Now you can, before you tighten these up, orient this any way you want in any one direction if you want to get the water and steam away from the unit. I'll probably put a piece of plastic tubing on here for the exhaust. Well, this is the intake, and it's the lubricator as well. So there's a little brass flange, a gasket, and 2 screws that'll fit it on like that. And then this is the cap with an O-ring that goes on it. And tighten down those final 2 screws, and I've already put the cap on the lubricator. Looking good. And next, the flywheel goes onto the shaft, and there is a little bit of a flat on the shaft for the set screw. Small enough. That's probably the smallest set screw I've ever worked with in my life. Now the flywheel has 2 different sides. I mean, the sides are not the same, so the concave side goes toward the outside. And tighten down the set screw on the flat. You know, I believe this flywheel is made of stainless steel. That's why it does not have a lot of magnetic properties, but it's a nice contrast to the brass and copper. It's a gorgeous engine. Now we got some way to turn it over without using the hand vise. There's a little brass guard that goes on the bottom here. I'm not sure that it's totally necessary, but it's a nice little finishing touch, and 4 cap screws to hold it on. There's the guard. Of course, you'll never be able to see it. Now, the final step is, you see those 4 tiny little holes? Well, that's where we put this little plaque, a rocking whale. Can you see it? Yeah. But you won't believe this. There are 4 screws that are so tiny. That's a dime. When I saw them mixed up with the other screws, I thought they were chips from the screw machine where they manufactured the parts. I don't think I'll be able to put those in, but I'm going to give it a try. But look at the size of them. I don't know if I have a screwdriver that small. I don't know if this is going to work, but I put a tiny dab of grease on the plaque to kind of hold it in place. And then I dug out the very smallest screwdriver from my jeweler set. I mean, it's just tiny, and I think that might work if I can find the screws. If I were to sneeze, they would be gone for good. That's a big old magnet that looks like a bullet. And this took 15 minutes with the tiniest screwdriver. I'm 82 years old. I wear bifocals, and I have cataracts, and I'm wearing an Aptivisor. It was the hardest part of this entire job. I don't glue it on, though, because this will get hot and wet. So glue probably won't work, maybe epoxy, but believe me, this was difficult. Okay, this does require quite a bit of skill, I have to admit, but the engine itself is done. And before I start talking about the boiler, and I'm going to try to run through that pretty fast, but I did take this over to the air compressor at about 5 or 10 psi, I'm not sure, but very low pressure to the inlet, and spun it over, and it ran just fine, just fine. I was really pleased. Here's the boiler housing, and there is a aluminum ring here, and it's drilled and tapped on one side. It will go on there like that, and these 4 tiny screws will go on the inside, and that's kind of tricky because you can't get your hand down there. And now the copper boiler itself will be inserted into the shell and mounted with these 2 holes on the front with these 2 screws. I'm ready to put the sight glass on, so there is an O-ring, a round O-ring to go in a rectangular hole, so I'll work that in, and then on top of that goes the sight glass, and this is really glass. It is not plastic. They couldn't use plastic. Then a gasket, and then a brass hold down, and 10 little screws. I can only find 8, so I might have used 2 in the wrong spot, but I'll get back to that and fix it later. Okay, I worked the O-ring in, and it worked pretty well. You might have to use a wooden stick rather than a metal stick, like a toothpick or something broke off. And then the sight glass, and the gasket, and the plate. We have 2 threaded holes here, so there's a brass plug with a washer that'll go in the left-hand hole, and then in the right-hand hole, the pressure gauge. Now that's kind of I would call it a banjo fitting. So there's another brass screw, and you'll put a washer on either side of the banjo fitting. I'm progressing quite nicely. So here's the pop-off valve. That's the pressure relief valve. And there's a little rubber or silicone washer that goes on that, and then the on and off valve or the control valve right here, so the brass nut needs to be spun on first, and then a washer on that as well. The valve has to be oriented toward the chimney, so I'll bring it around and then I'll tighten the lock nut. And then, trying to speed it up here, This is the pop-off valve, but it's also the filler hole for the water in the boiler. Well, we're making progress. We're almost to the end, so there's a tiny little plaque that also goes on the side of the boiler with two little screws. And then on the front, this is where the fuel goes. There's a little bit of a door here that will swing up and two tiny hinges. So I will do all of that off camera. I already installed the handle on the alcohol burner, and there are 4 rubber feet to mount on the aluminum base, and they are fastened on with screws coming up from the bottom and these beautiful little brass acorn nuts for a final elegant touch. Finishing up now, all we have left to do is to mount the boiler onto the base with 4 screws and the engine onto the base with 4 screws and connect the pipe, the tubing, to the engine, and we're ready to fire it up. I'm just about done here. I took the engine back off the base because I decided to fit this up by attaching the copper here first, and fortunately they pre-bent this, and then attaching it to the engine and then pulling the engine into alignment with the 4 holes. Let me say one other thing now, notice that the tubing passes through the chimney, and that is the superheater. Now, if you don't know what a superheater is, look it up on the internet, Wikipedia, and I don't know how much good that does, about 3/4 of an inch passing through and getting heated again. Okay, the engine is ready to run, and off camera I will fill this with the proper amount of denatured alcohol, and I will fill the boiler through here about 3/4 full. Never run your boiler dry, and use distilled water, never use tap water. Now, I do not have any steam oil, so I will be filling this with 30 weight non-detergent. I don't know where you would get steam oil, perhaps on eBay. Absolutely do not run your engine on carpeting or a tablecloth or any fine furniture. Lay a pan down. That's what this is for, because there'll be a lot of condensation. And I added this piece of silicone tubing so it doesn't spit out and make a mess. The water will end up here in the tray. So, be back in a minute after I have done all of the fillings that I just talked about, and be sure and read the warning, the last few pages in the manual. Well, after finally working on this for 3 or 4 days, I'm ready to actually fire it up. So, I have in this Pyrex container 200 milliliters of distilled water. Now I'm going to put that in here, and use yourself an enema syringe like this. It works so much better than a funnel. And then into the burner there will be 50 milliliters of denatured alcohol. There's a 50 milliliter beaker, and I've already put 4 milliliters of oil into the oiler here. I didn't have steam oil, so I used 30 weight, as I said before. So I'm not sure if this holds the full 200 milliliter, but I want to fill the boiler so it's about 2/3 or 3/4 full. And I'll go by the sight glass. Okay, I'm approximately 2/3 of the way full. Kind of hard to see without extra light. And the 50 milliliters of alcohol. Be careful. I have oiled all the moving parts again, and I'll put the plug in and tighten it down, and we're ready to light it up. The steam valve should be turned off, and let's fire it up, fire it up, fire it up. And shove it in. That took a long time, 10 to 15 minutes. You know, a watched pot will not boil, but we're just about up to steam, as you can see. And we're about up to 2 on the pressure gauge. Do not let children play with this, but it's getting pretty hot, and you see a little bit of condensation coming out of the tube here, even though this is off. So I'm just about ready to open the valve, and we'll see what happens. The steam valve is very hot. You can see it steaming a little bit, so either wear gloves or use a tweezer or something to turn the valve on. Wrong. Look at that, it just started instantly. I'm impressed. I thought I'd have to spin it over. And see how the condensed steam turning to water is ending up in a pan. You don't want that to make a mess. Oh, I'm stoked. Just like the furnace. I'm going to slow it down just a little bit. I like to run them slow, although I know young people like to run them full blast. Alright, I'm going to slow it down and reverse the rotation. See, it was going clockwise, so now should go in the other direction. And now it's in reverse. Now if you run it for a long time, wide open, the steam pressure may drop on you. This is fun. Well, I couldn't be pleased more. What a precision little engine, and just fired up instantly. Alright, I'm having fun, and I'm going to play with this a lot more off camera, but I'm going to show you how to shut the whole thing down at the end of the session. Again, keep watching your sight glass. You do not run low on water, and I'm not sure how long the fuel will last, but at some point it's going to go out. But I need to turn the burner off, so I'm going to show you how to do that right now. I'm going to start by turning this off. You may or may not be able to see the flame when you pull the burner out, so be very careful. But it is still on. Now you need to smother it, so use a piece of John's Mansville asbestos, the miracle material, and a little piece of metal over it to smother it. That's the safe way of doing it. Thank you so much for watching, and if you're interested in one of these engines, you can get them at Stirlingkit.com, and I'll put a link again in the description along with the discount code. Thank you so much. Now stand by for a few still pictures, including some very pertinent information regarding steam and steam oil and things like that, so watch those still pictures as well. This is Mr. Pete. I have 1,500 other shop videos, and I'll see you in one of them. So long for now. And I'm draining it of steam right now. You'll see it stop in a few minutes. A few seconds, actually. There it is, and it will remain hot for quite a while, so do not put it away at this time.